Amen. Thank you, Pastor Doug. Sure. Well, again, welcome to the Mosaic service. My name is Matt Koomen. If we have not got the chance to meet, stick around after. I'd love to say hi to you. This past week, I got to be a chaplain at Geneva. Me and a few of the other staff members here from community got to head out there for the week, and we just had an absolute riot. I was the chaplain for the high school group, which this week for them it was a bit unique because they were doing more of a camping experience for high school. So they were tenting it down at the cadets campground area right down the road. And it was funny because Sunday here, when we were here, we prayed for rain. And then they set up all the tents and got all their bedding situated, and it rained. And it rained and it rained. And so Monday afternoon, my job changed from being a chaplain to doing all of the laundry and drying loads. I think we did 8 or 9 loads of their bedding so that they could sleep in dry bedding for the night. So we got them out of the tents for Monday night, but then got right back in on Tuesday. So we had a blast out there after the rain came through. It turned out to be a really good week. But it was fun to be out there and be able to support some of the staff and the students out there. But this week, we get to continue in our series on the book of Ephesians. We're already starting to get towards the end of this series. We'll be wrapping it up in a few weeks here. But we're going to be in Ephesians 5 today. So if you want, you can turn your Bibles to Ephesians 5. We're going to cover the first half of that this morning. But I want to start out, a few years ago, we got the chance to take a family trip to the Grand Canyon. And one of our stops was the Hoover Dam. Anyone ever been to the Hoover Dam before? Yeah, just one of those places that like pictures don't really do it justice. But I want to show you pictures anyway, just for those of you who can picture it. Pretty incredible, right? Like a monstrous structure of a thing. You can go to the next one here. You can see the height of how much that water is. If you even want to go back, I think that first one shows it a little bit better. But just the magnitude of this. The dam actually contains 4.4 million cubic yards of concrete. Right, just absolutely massive. And that many yards of concrete doesn't even comprehend to me. And so what it equates to, that is enough to pave a 2-lane highway all the way from San Francisco to New York. Crazy, right? The amount of concrete. And there's so much concrete, this is wild to me, that it's still slowly hardening because that concrete is actually so thick. It's a border between Nevada and Arizona that provides a bunch of the electricity. I don't fully understand all the science of how that works, but it's an incredible monument to the day and age of dam building. Now, every year, engineers walk through the dam and inspect it with a comb, right? They look very closely at the dam, looking for hairline cracks, right? They're not looking for holes, really. They're not looking for anyone who's come in there with a demolition team. They're looking for the tiniest little things. They're looking for the cracks that, as a visitor, I won't look at twice, right? But they realize as engineers, if there's a crack, there may be a bigger issue, right? There may be something going on behind that actually needs to be addressed because they know the kind of damage that one small crack could actually bring. One seam, one small crack, one even hairline crack, a little drip, right? Some of you have seen the damage even in our houses, what one small drip will do over time. I remember when we were house shopping for our first house, we'd be going through houses, and in the foundation, there's like a big crack going all the way down, and I'm like, I'm sure we can fix that. Luckily, I had smarter people in my life saying, no, don't buy that, right? Because there's that little crack could be something that's way bigger than that. It could become way more of an issue. This whole house's function could collapse is because of the foundation having a crack in it. We've seen that kind of damage. In the early 1900s, speaking of dams specifically, in California, there was a dam called St. Francis, one of the bigger dams in that day and age. And a engineer by the name of William Mulholland found a crack, and he simply dismissed it as just like, this is just normal wear and tear on dams. And he put a little bit of grout in it, but didn't actually look deeper if there was a bigger problem outside of that. And just a few hours after he inspected it and made the fix that he thought was enough, after he declared it safe, that dam ruptured. And that crack became a much bigger crack, and once water got through it, it completely collapsed. And because of it, the damage downstream was immense. In that day and age, it killed 400 people in the Santa Clara Valley because that crack gave way. And today, we're going to be addressing some of that, the little hints in our life, the little cracks in our life that Paul references directly to the church of Ephesus. He's going to talk about the hints of sins that may lead to something more. But what you'll notice about Paul is he's not going into the big things they've got to be worried about in their life that may cause destruction. He's talking about the small things, the kinds of things that they often avoid, the kinds of things they would overlook. He's saying, stop a moment, and maybe it's time to address some of those things. Last week, we talked about the famous quarterback, Tom Brady. A few of you remembered last week, otherwise we got to go all the way back. But Tom Brady, right? And we talked about how Tom Brady, when he got switched to a new team, when he signed with a new team, he had to take the Patriots jersey off and put a new jersey on and start playing as a different quarterback for a different team, because he needed to be not a Patriot in a Buccaneers jersey. He needed to fully embrace the new culture of that system. And we talked about that idea of putting on something new. Paul was very clear with the church of Ephesus. But this week, it takes that next step of, okay, if you've got a new jersey on, if you've committed to this as your new way of life, what does that need to look like for us? What are some of the things that we may need to avoid? Some of the hints at things that are dangerous for those of us who have said yes to Jesus Christ? What shouldn't be in our life? So let's dive in with that. We're going to be starting at Ephesians 5, starting at verse 1. He says this: follow God's example, therefore. So the therefore, he's talking about pretty much everything that Paul's already addressed. Like, because you have that new jersey, this is what it looks like. Follow God's example, therefore, as dearly loved children, and walk in the way of love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. But among you there must not be even a hint of sexual immorality, or any kind of impurity, or of greed, because these are improper for God's holy people. Nor should there be obscenity, foolish talk, coarse joking, which are out of place, but rather thanksgiving. For of this you can be sure: no immoral, impure, or greedy person, such a person is an idolater, has any inheritance to the kingdom of Christ and of God. Let no one deceive you with empty words. For because of such things, God's wrath comes on those who are disobedient. Therefore, do not be partners with them. See those last few words? Don't let anyone deceive you with empty words. Don't be partners with them. Paul's referencing something very specific that would have created some light bulbs that are going off potentially in the people of Ephesus. Now, we've talked in great detail on the market, right, of Paul being in the market. And Paul, last week we talked about that commotion that happened in the theater and everything revolving around this, what they would call the agora, the marketplace in that day and age. Now, in order to sell at the market, you would need to be a part of the trade guilds. That's what they called, what we would most likely call in our day of age is like a, it's we'll get there in just a moment. But in this market, you had to be a part of these trade guilds in order to sell things. And it really was like a modern-day labor union that would have been created, but almost a mixture of a labor union and a college frat party and frat house at the same time, which you often don't think combined together. But in that day and age, that is what worked together for these trade guilds. Now, if you wanted to be a silversmith, or if you wanted to be a mason, or if you wanted like any of these big trades in that day and age, you were legally and socially required to be an active member in these trade guilds, a lot like a labor union, right? If you wanted to work at a specific, there's some places if you want to work there, you have to be a part of the union. But there was a huge problem for Christians in that day. People who said yes to Jesus Christ also being a part of these trade guilds. Because in these trade guilds, as much as they were a labor union, they had that fraternity college life going at the same time. You needed to attend what they would consider, words are hard today, I'm going to forget this word, Triclinian. Is that how we say it? Sure. Doug says yes. I say yes today. Okay, so in these triclinian, there we go. That's what I wanted to say. In these celebrations that these unions would have, there would be excessive heavy drinking. It was very much revolved around heavy drinking, and often after a lot of heavy drinking, these parties, these labor unions, would very quickly turn into very dark sexual immorality that would be happening in these gatherings. Now, as a Christian, if you wanted to work, especially in some of the bigger trades, what do? Right? You're required to be, if you want to sell things in the market as some of these specific trades, you had to be involved in this. So what does it look like? Right? And Paul is telling these people, don't be partners with them, especially if they are leading you to sin. Don't let them deceive you. Don't be a part of it. It isn't worth it. When you take off the old self and put on the new self, you can no longer participate in things like this because it'll lead you into some incredible darkness. We'll kind of close that bookend there because you can imagine the darkness that takes place in some of these things. I want to continue. Verse 8. For you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Live as children of light. For the fruit of the light consists in all goodness, righteousness, and truth. And find out what pleases the Lord. Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. It's shameful even to mention what the disobedient do in secret. Right? It's like even Paul is having a hard time writing down, there's some real darkness that are happening behind closed doors in these trade guilds. But everything exposed by the light becomes visible, and everything that is illuminated becomes a light. And this is why it is said, wake up, sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. Verse 15, be very careful then how you live. Not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. Do not get drunk on wine, which leads to debauchery. Instead, be filled with the Spirit. And I want to pause here for a moment because I think that verse 18, do not get drunk on wine, which leads to debauchery. Instead, be filled with the Spirit. What's interesting is Paul is not in this verse saying, don't drink, don't get drunk. Anyone like, whew, glad that's not what he's saying here. Okay, good. Okay, but what he's actually saying is even more so than that. It's absolutely mind-boggling when you take a look at the context of this. In Ephesus, the whole of the city was designated to one God. Okay, we've talked about this over the course of the last 6-8 weeks, talking about the god Artemis often. And so the city as a whole was designated to Artemis. We've looked at the temple and the magnitude of it and some of the things that would take place around the temple of Artemis, the things that would be expected of people who were participating in this worship. But the theater, which we looked at a little bit last week. Remember the crowd of 25,000 rushed into the theater and were accusing Paul of some things. That theater would have been designated to Artemis, the main god of the city, but also any theater in that area, Turkey and Greece, any theater that was made would also be designated to a second god. So it would be designated most likely to the city god and a second god. And that second god was Dionysus. Dionysus is this second god. And he is one of the 12 Olympian gods back in that day and age. And he's the god of wine, fertility, ritual, ecstasy, and the theater. So anytime a city would unveil a theater, they'd construct a theater, they would designate it as the city's god most likely, but also this other god of Dionysus. Now, in Ephesus, they have not excavated, here, we'll jump up. Is there a picture of so this is what we looked at last week, if you remember. This is the theater of Ephesus. Now, oftentimes, next to the theater would be this temple of Dionysus. This is what would be very, very common in that day and age to off the temple have a small theater that's designated to that god. Now, it isn't excavated in Ephesus, but a location I actually sat in in this theater. It's the theater of Pergamum, and off down to the bottom you can see there's some ruins. And that would have been the temple of Dionysus. And in Ephesus, they haven't excavated that far off to the right side of the theater. They're continuing to excavate and find new things, but they don't know if that's for sure there. But oftentimes it would be. There's a next picture to that. So this is Pergamum, which is very similar to Ephesus, but you can see the theater down there. They did a rendering of what it would have looked like, most likely, when it's all put together. Some people composed this. The top one is what it looks like today. The bottom is the magnitude of what it would have potentially looked like. And you can see off to the bottom left there, this temple of Dionysus, that would be standing at the bottom part of the theater. Now, for this god, in most cities, once a year there would be a festival that was dedicated to celebrating Dionysus and all the things that Dionysus would bring them throughout the year. And in this festival, it would start in the theater. And if you remember, the theater is just off to his temple is just off to the side, so they correlated very closely together. So this 15-day festival would be a lot about entertainment. There'd be someone on the stage who is entertaining people. They call them hypocrites. Super interesting, right? It's hypocrite. That word we actually change into actor in our day and age. But they would have referred to the people on the stage as hypocrites who would get the crowd excited, get the crowd going, act out specific dramas that they would be pretending to do for people, how we get our word hypocrite at the same time. Now, during these rituals, at one point after a few days of celebrating, the pagan priests would, after like the drums would be going and people are celebrating, they would gather big jars of water. And they would take these jars of water down from the theater and walk up to the temple where everyone could see. If you're at the temple, if you can go back to that last picture a minute. If you're in the theater, you could see how the priests would walk to the temple. The priests are walking with these big jars of water, and they go in there, and after a designated amount of time, they walk out with jars of wine. It's a miracle, right? The God of Dionysus has provided. He's the God of wine, and they would bring out this wine to the people, and the people would drink. They would drink, and they would drink, and after a few glasses, you can imagine the people in the theater, these potentially 25, 30,000 people, all start to get a buzz together. And they believed that this buzz, or this altered state of consciousness, right, was the literal spirit of the god of Dionysus entering their body. Right? As they drank his wine, they started to sense, I'm feeling the presence of the God inside of me. And this overindulgence of wine and alcohol led to a lot of darkness, similar to the darkness of the trade guilds, that they would go out into the mountains, and there would be a lot of sexual violence against children. A lot of unwanted pregnancies would result in these festivals, and it became an extremely destructive cycle of worship towards this god Dionysus. But what's fascinating is they viewed this, and they viewed this drinking and this overindulgence, this running into the hills to be with whoever was out there, right? They viewed this as being filled with the spirit of Dionysus. Intoxication with wine was this direct association for them of, we're being filled with his spirit. Right? We get a sense of who he is because we're so filled with this. But that story, for so many people, only ended with heartache and brokenness and shame. See, what does that story, though, of water to wine remind us of? There's a moment in our New Testament, John describes it very well, where Jesus, when he's at a wedding, he notices that the host has run out of wine, which would have been filled with immense shame in that culture. We can't go into it much today, but it would have brought the family immense shame if they ran out of wine at the celebration of new life and new life together. And so Jesus, he turns water into wine. And I never realized it until I was going through this. I wonder if Jesus is already pointing people to this understanding that they would have been fairly familiar with, that the worship of Dionysus, the way they would go from. I just wonder if they were picturing those pagan priests doing this ritual, and Jesus is already hinting at it's got to be different than that. Right? It can't be filled with shame and darkness on the back end of it. I'm going to bring you life in a new way. And we get the chance to celebrate together a new life and a new marriage together. And it doesn't need to be what you've always been used to. I would argue that it's not about Jesus imitating a pagan festival or a pagan miracle. I wonder if he's actually trying to eliminate shame and show them a new way of life. But back to Paul. See, I think Paul is almost certainly making a direct countercultural claim against a very real thing that the people would have most likely been either actively participating in or watching other people actively participate in. It wasn't something that you could just avoid in this culture. When the city is designated, the theater is designated to this god and these gods, it was something you just lived to be a part of. See, in that spirituality that Paul uses is the very same language of being filled with what Dionysus is also proclaiming as well. Paul is saying it has got to be different than that. Paul is not coming up with a new idea that the people wouldn't have been used to, like what does this drunkenness mean and being filled with the Spirit? What does all of that even look like? No, the people, when he's saying these things, would have directly associated what's happening in their backyard at these festivals. He's fully contesting what's very much in the air surrounding Ephesus. But I found the reality is that this Dionysus worship wasn't necessarily popular because people are dumb or because people are evil to their core. I think it goes a whole lot deeper than that because it answers something actually real for them. See, I think all of us today as well as back then, we have this hunger to be filled with something, right? To lose yourself in something bigger, to be a part of something even bigger than yourself, and even to be connected with the divine in some way, right? We all want to pursue that in some fashion. I'd argue that hunger is legitimate. And Paul isn't saying completely avoid that, right? Completely try to get rid of any longing you have to be filled with something that is more than yourself. But he's telling them you're filling it with this completely counterfeit idea. Right? There is a true one, though. There's something, God has designed you in such a way to long for that, but you've been filling it with something that's so false for far too long. There is a spirit that you can be filled with. You've just been doing it with the wrong spirit. If that isn't what it is, right? How does it look like for the people then? Like, if Paul's telling them this, what do we do then? What does being filled with the Spirit actually mean for Christians at that point? And Paul ends with this section. He says this, continuing back up in verse 18. Instead, be filled with the Spirit, speaking to one another with psalms, hymns, and songs from the Spirit. Sing and make music from your heart to the Lord. Always give thanks to God the Father for everything in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. And we get to continue in our series that's going to map this out even more. But this is the closing of what Paul is trying to put in this. Being filled with the spirit of Dionysus means completely losing yourself. Right? You get in a state of consciousness where you don't actually know about the decisions you're making anymore. And half the time the people would wake up not knowing what happened that night before. And Paul is saying it means something different. Your longing to be filled with the Spirit is being met by a false God who only brings heartache and brokenness if you participate in it. God offers you something drastically different. Being filled with a Spirit that'll bring you fulfillment in life, that'll bring you joy, that'll make you want to bow your head and worship. See, being filled with the Spirit leads to this worship. It ends very differently than what that world would have been used to. See, I think for us, the reality is that same hunger Dionysus fed is very much alive and well today. Right? The issue of substance abuse, that crowd euphoria, right? Whether you get that from sporting events or music events. If you've ever been a part of going to a big game or a college game, and you get a sense of the energy of a space when 100,000 people gather and they're excited about one team, everybody's chanting. You just feel this euphoric high of being a part of something bigger than yourself, right? That stuff comes naturally, and we may not be doing the same things of Dionysus and worshiping those things and going out into the hills and participating in some god-awful things, but there are very much some things in our life that are still filling us that maybe they shouldn't be. See, Paul is telling the church of Ephesus to be filled. Be filled by something different, though. Paul warned them that if there's a hint, if there's a crack in their lives that's slowly letting things in, to address those things. Not even a hint of these things can be in our life. I think back to the Hoover Dam, right? A breach in the Hoover Dam would cause incredible destruction. Right? The problems that would come from that, the flood wave that would travel downstream would be absolutely destructive. Or you can imagine what the loss of life that would come from that. And Paul is telling the people of Ephesus, not even a hint, right? Not even a crack. Don't allow those little things. Don't go into the theater and participate. And don't just sit back and watch these things happen. Don't be active in the trade guilds. Take yourself out of these positions where you allow little cracks and little hints of the debauchery to happen in your life. So that leaves us with this. What does this mean for us today? See, what cracks are in your life? What are you using to fill that longing for what God has actually put in our lives that are very good things, that longing to be filled with the Spirit? What might you actually be filling those things with instead? How might you be escaping? See, we may not have those elaborate drunk fests, but we do very much have things that fill in and create some cracks in our life. Because the devil's crafty. I think he's actually found some much easier ways to create cracks, to create hints of brokenness, especially brokenness that we can so easily hide. I think about the brokenness that the church of Ephesus would have been experiencing, and it was very visual. People could see it very clearly, and so they could step back and avoid it, but I think for us today, it may be even harder in some ways. The cracks that may be in our life. I think one of the huge ways that the devil is crafty is often how we use our phones. I think the devil creates a crack in our life because the phones are something we need, right? It's our way of communication with everyone. It's our way of staying in touch with everyone, but it is a gateway to so much more, right? It's a gateway first to greed, right? And seeing everybody else's vacations, right? And on social media, see all the best of people's lives. You never actually see the worst of people's lives. So you compare your own life to the lives of the people on social media, and you get jealous. And you all of a sudden look at your life, and it is not as good as you thought it once was. It's the gateway to greed. There's also the gateway to laziness. Right? So often I even find myself picking up my phone because I got a notification or somebody sent me a message, and then all of a sudden a half hour later, I'm still scrolling. Right? Just from one simple text that got me derailed, and all of a sudden the dopamine in my head is like, you need more of this. You need more of this. It's a gateway to sexual idolatry, all at your fingertips. Whether you're trying to hide what you're looking at, whether you're trying to hide a conversation you're having behind closed doors on your phone, it's all right there in front of you. I also think it's a gateway to the coarse language. Paul talks about addressing that as well, and we easily watch and we listen for different podcasts. We watch different movies, and we let go their language because, well, we're just listening to it. It's not a big deal for us, but maybe what we're allowing our ears to hear is that little crack starting in our lives. And all of a sudden, the language that didn't used to be present in our life, all of a sudden has slowly crept in. And when you hit your thumb with a hammer, all of a sudden that word that you've heard that you haven't said is all of a sudden in your head. And maybe you say, oh, I didn't say it out loud, right? But that crack is slowly getting bigger and working its way in. And the reality, often if we let these hint of things, Paul knows the destruction that comes from the hints. We've seen the destruction that comes from the cracks in foundation, the cracks of big things in our life. It's often small, but just like water can slowly work through and create something bigger, these sins in our life can create so much more. Because first, it isn't a big deal. and no one knows first. No one gets hurt first. But Paul says, maybe not today, but there's a catastrophe on the back end if this doesn't go checked. So a challenge as we wrap up this week for you. A challenge for you. Look at your life. Look at the cracks. What thing have you been saying, it's okay. It's not hurting anyone. It's not that big a deal. No one actually even notices. So I'm going to just participate in it occasionally. It's not that big a deal for me. I have it under control. What are those hints that Paul may have been referencing to the church of Ephesus that very much matter in your life today? What have you been avoiding because it isn't an issue yet, but it could become something soon? I challenge you, think about that and think about what does it mean to fully pull that out of your life and not allow that hint to become something more. Would you pray with me? God, we come to you today. And we thank you for your word. And we thank you for the way that it just continues to blow me away how much the church back in that day was very much wrestling with similar moral issues that we wrestle with today, even though it looked a little bit different. God, I ask that as we look at our own lives, as we try to address the hints of sin, the cracks that may be entering in our lives, that you help us see those things clearly and give us the courage to actually address those straightforward. Don't let those hints continue to be active in our lives. God, we ask this all in your name we pray. Amen. Thanks.
So, if you've been